After Charlie Kirk was shot, the Capitol became a battlefield of truth. Jasmine Crockett faced Trump, proving his violent words didn't just stir crowds. They armed rage until tragedy exploded. Millions watched waiting for his answer, which of his own lines sealed Kirk's fate. Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The doors slammed shut with a sound that felt like a verdict. Every camera light blinked red. Every reporter froze their pens hovering midair. Outside, the crowd pressed against barricades, holding candles high, their voices thundering in unison. No more blood, no more blood. 24 hours earlier, Charlie Kirk had fallen on stage, his last breath tangled with words that belonged to Donald Trump. The nation wasn't just grieving, it was demanding answers. Trump sat hunched, his body rigid, his knuckles white around a trembling stack of papers. His aides whispered frantic notes he didn't read. His face was pale, his jaw locked, yet his eyes darted toward the cameras, knowing there was no escape. The room was waiting and the silence was louder than any roar. Then Jasmine Crockett rose. No binders, no theatrics, just a single folded sheet in her hand. Her stare cut through the air, and her voice struck like a blade. Mr. Trump, do you accept responsibility that your words led to the death of Charlie Kirk? The chamber froze, time itself holding its breath. The silence that followed Jasmine's opening question was suffocating. Trump's lips parted, then tightened again, the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a vice. He finally leaned toward the microphone, his voice low but edged with anger. I didn't pull the trigger. Don't put that blood on me. The words cracked the tension but didn't release it. Instead, they rippled across the room like a challenge daring someone to strike back. The air quivered and all eyes turned toward Jasmine. She didn't flinch. She didn't shuffle her notes or search for words. She leaned forward, her voice cutting clean through the marble chamber. You're right. You didn't pull the trigger. You held the microphone, and your microphone echoed before the bullet struck. Her words snapped through the silence like a whip. The chamber stirred whispers, breaking out, cameras zooming tighter. Outside, the chants grew louder, syncing with the tension inside. No more blood. No more blood. The chairman gave a curt nod, and suddenly the screens along the chamber walls flickered to life. A reporter in the gallery had already cued the evidence, and now the entire room was forced to witness it. The live stream clip from Utah began rolling. The familiar stage lights, the crowd cheering Charlie Kirk, clutching his microphone with boyish defiance. The timestamp on the corner of the screen read 7:14. And then his voice, firm, rehearsed, carrying a line everyone in the room recognized. If they come for me, they come for you. The words slammed into the chamber with brutal clarity. Jasmine's eyes never left Trump. The clip continued. Only 2 minutes separated Kirk's echo of Trump's slogan from the chaos that followed. The timestamp turned to 7:16. A crack split the air. The crowd in the video screamed. Kirk's body jerked, then collapsed. The camera shook, the live stream cut to black. And in the chamber, no one breathed. For the first time all day, even the reporters stopped scribbling. Lawmakers sat frozen, their faces pale as the horror replayed before their eyes. The contrast was merciless words at 7:14, blood at 7:16. 2 minutes. That was all. On one side, rhetoric. On the other, tragedy. The weight of it landed like a blow no one could dodge. Jasmine broke the silence, her voice calm but merciless. This was not coincidence. His final words were not his own. They were yours. Your line left your lips, then his, and then the bullet followed. The echo of your words was the last sound before he fell. Her words landed like a verdict, sharper than any accusation. The chamber stirred again, the sound of shifting chairs' throats, clearing hearts pounding loud enough to feel. Trump's face flushed. He slammed a hand onto his stack of papers. That's not proof, he barked. People repeat things all the time. I can't control what someone says at a rally. I never told him to go out there and get himself killed. His voice rose, filling the chamber with defiance, but there was no strength in it, only desperation. He looked around, searching for allies, but the silence was not his friend. Jasmine stepped closer to the microphone, her eyes locked on him like a hunter who refused to let the prey escape. No one said you ordered the trigger pulled, but you can't dismiss this as chance. You can't call it random when the last thing out of his mouth was your message repeated like scripture, and 2 minutes later he was bleeding on the floor. That isn't coincidence. That is consequence. Her words echoed against the marble, leaving Trump no space to retreat. The chamber trembled with unease. Reporters whispered their notes frantic, their headlines already writing themselves, from words to blood in 2 minutes. Outside, the chants grew louder, pounding against the walls as if to join the prosecution. Trump's jaw tightened, sweat glistening at his temple. He muttered again, "This isn't fair. This is a setup. I only speak truth." She leaned closer, her voice steady, refusing to rise because she knew control was deadlier than rage. "So tell us, Mr. Trump, tell the American people how you can possibly deny responsibility when your words were the final echo before a man fell to the ground. How do you deny it when his last breath carried your slogan?" The question landed like a gavel strike. The chamber fell still again, the silence now unbearable, every second dragging like a sentence. On the screens, the image of Charlie Kirk's collapse froze, a haunting reminder of the cost of words. Trump stared at it, his lips pressed tight, but no answer came. And Jasmine didn't need to push further. The evidence spoke for itself. 2 minutes of tape had already done what years of politics couldn't expose: the deadly price of rhetoric. The room knew it. The nation watching knew it. And Donald Trump, gripping his notes with trembling hands, knew it too. The chamber still reeled from the replay of the clip when Jasmine leaned back, letting the silence drag, then reached for a thin folder at her side. She unfolded it slowly, her eyes never leaving Trump. "We've all seen what happened in 2 minutes," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "But this isn't only about video evidence. This nation has faced this question before. When do words cross the line from rhetoric into violence?" Her hand tapped the folder once, and the echo was like a hammer. She pulled out the first page and raised it high. "Brandenburg versus Ohio, 1969, she announced. The chamber shifted, senators whispering, reporters scribbling. Jasmine's tone turned crisp, almost surgical. "That case involved a Klan rally. A man stood on a stage much like Mr. Kirk and used words that called for violence. The court ruled that when speech is directed to inciting imminent lawless action, and when it is likely to produce such action, then those words are not protected. They are a crime." She let the phrase hang, "not protected, a crime." Trump barked a laugh, bitter and sharp. "That's theory. That's some dusty book, nothing to do with me." He waved his papers like a shield, his face red, his jaw grinding. "You can't compare a decades-old ruling to me standing at a rally. I'm not on trial in a law school classroom." His voice grew louder, as though volume could wash away the precedent. But Jasmine didn't blink. She stepped forward, her page still in hand. "This is not a theory," she replied, her voice cutting through his protest. "This is the law of the United States. And the Brandenburg test, imminent lawless action likely to produce it, is exactly why we are here. Mr. Kirk repeated your words, and within minutes violence struck. That is not abstract. That is not dusty. That is cause and effect." The chamber buzzed, the tension swelling again, the precedent no longer buried in books but alive in the marble hall. Jasmine flipped to another sheet. "This isn't the only case. Hess versus Indiana, 1973. A protester shouted, 'We'll take the streets later.' The court ruled it wasn't imminent, so it was protected. Why? Because the danger wasn't immediate. But here she slammed her hand on the screen, still frozen, at 7:14. Kirk's words filling the chamber. Here the danger was minutes, not later. 2 minutes. And the consequence was blood. This is the very definition of imminent. Her words rang, slicing through the room like a siren. Trump leaned into his microphone, sneering. "You're twisting. I never told anyone to shoot. I never said, go commit violence. This whole lecture is nothing but stretching lines to trap me." His voice shook with defiance, but his eyes darted toward the screen, toward the frozen image of Kirk mid-sentence, as if even he couldn't outrun the timeline. He gripped his notes tighter, but the tremor in his hand betrayed him. Jasmine's voice softened, but the steel in it only sharpened the impact. "Mr. Trump, these rulings exist for a reason, because our nation has seen what happens when speech turns into a spark. The courts said it 50 years ago, when leaders stand on stages and point to enemies, when they say fight, when they push people toward the edge, then they are not innocent. They are responsible." She paused, her eyes locked on him. "And responsibility is what you are trying to outrun." The chamber was silent, but outside the chants pressed harder against the walls, a drumbeat of anger and grief. Jasmine let the sound bleed into her words. If the law itself has said speech can kill, then I ask you, Mr. Trump, what shield do you believe you hold? What power makes you think you can stand above precedent, above law, above the very truth carved into this nation's history? Her words hammered down like verdicts. Trump shook his head, his voice breaking into a growl. Because I speak for the people, because millions follow me, not dusty cases. You want to bury me in paper, but I live in the hearts of Americans. His bravado was loud, but the edge of desperation crept beneath it, each word wobbling like a tightrope walker over fire. Jasmine took a single step closer, lowering her voice until the chamber had to lean in. Hearts are not bulletproof, Mr. Trump. And Charlie Kirk proved it. The law said decades ago that words can cross the line. Last night, your words did. So tell us, if courts have already ruled that speech can kill, then what foundation do you stand on to claim immunity? She let the question hang sharp as a blade impossible to dodge. The chamber froze again. Reporters' pens raced. Senators sat rigid. The gallery barely breathed. Trump opened his mouth and closed it, his silence filling the void louder than any denial. And Jasmine, steady as stone, watched him drown in it. The weight of the legal precedents still lingered in the air when Jasmine calmly reached for another folder. She didn't raise her voice, but the room leaned forward anyway, as if sensing the next strike. Mr. Trump, law is not the only place we find proof, she said. Science has spoken too. Social psychology has studied the effect of incendiary speech for decades, and the conclusion is clear. She unfolded a sheet and read it aloud. When leaders use violent language, words like enemy or fight, the likelihood of violent action in a crowd increases by 40%. A murmur rippled across the chamber. The number was stark, unavoidable. Senators shifted uneasily in their seats. Reporters scribbled faster, already imagining the headlines. Jasmine's eyes narrowed as she pressed the point. 40%. Almost half. That isn't passion, Mr. Trump. That is escalation measured, documented, peer-reviewed. This is not theory. It is evidence that when you stand on a stage and turn politics into war, the crowd doesn't just cheer louder. It becomes more dangerous. Trump shot back instantly, his voice snapping like a whip. That's junk science, professors in ivory towers who don't understand real America. People cheer because they're angry, because they're ignored. Numbers on a page don't mean anything in the real world. His fist slammed against the table, his papers scattering, his face red with fury. The sound echoed through the chamber, but it only amplified the desperation behind the denial. Jasmine let the outburst settle before striking again. She flipped to another page, this time stamped with the seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She held it up for the cameras to catch. Then let's talk about numbers that are not from ivory towers. Numbers from the FBI. Numbers your own government collected. Her voice hardened as she read. After rallies where you repeated the word fight more than 10 times, hate crimes in the surrounding counties surged within 72 hours. In some cases, increases as high as 200%. Gasps cut across the chamber. Some lawmakers leaned back, stunned. The figures were cold, relentless. Jasmine raised her voice just enough to drive the nail deeper. This is not academic. This is federal law enforcement. Every spike tied not to abstract anger, but to dates, places, and words that came from your microphone. And every spike left real people bleeding, real families grieving. Trump leaned into his mic, his voice rough, defensive. Fake, more fake numbers. Agencies are full of people out to get me. They've been cooking books against me since day one. You think I trust a single word from the FBI? It's all political. His rant spilled fast, desperate like a man clawing against a tide. His words ricocheted in the chamber, but his face betrayed him, sweat at the temple jaw, twitching eyes darting like a man boxed in. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her tone was steady, lethal in its restraint. This is not my invention. These are not rumors. These are federal records. You can insult scholars all you want, but you cannot erase the ink of the FBI. You can call them liars, but you cannot call the morgues liars. And when hospitals filled after your rallies, when families buried loved ones after your chants, it wasn't data that killed them. It was blood spilled in real time. Her voice carried like a verdict, unshakable, undeniable. The chamber sat frozen reporters scribbling with frantic hands, senators shifting under the weight of the evidence. The air was heavy, almost choking, as though the walls themselves were absorbing the numbers Jasmine had unleashed. Even outside, the chants seemed to falter for a moment, the crowd catching its breath as if listening for what would come next. Jasmine leaned in, her eyes burning through the silence. Her voice dropped, quiet but sharp enough to pierce every heart in the room. "Mr. Trump, you can deny the numbers. You can shout fake until your voice breaks. But tell us this, will you also deny the blood? Will you deny the graves left in the wake of your rallies? Will you look this country in the eye and say that when you shouted, 'Fight,' the violence that followed was just coincidence?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Trump's mouth opened, then shut. His hands gripped the table, his papers crumpling under his fists. The silence swallowed him whole. The numbers and the silence held, and Jasmine let both sink in before she moved. She slid a new folder onto the table, its tab marked in red, and looked straight at Trump. "Law, science, blood," she said evenly. "Now we add something else, orders." The room leaned forward as she lifted a single page and signaled the screen operator. A document filled the monitors, crisp and cold. At the top, internal campaign memo, Jasmine said, reading cleanly, "Subject line, escalate the fight." Body text, "Calm as defeat. Escalate the fight." The words sat there like a command carved in stone. On the right margin, a timestamp glowed. August 28th, 11:47 p.m. Beneath it, a line of characters formed a digital signature. 12 recipients, she added, all senior. Trump jerked the microphone closer. "Fake. Forged." "I never wrote that," he snapped. "Anybody can type words and slap a time on it." His voice rose, chasing the memo across the screens, as if he could shout it away. Jasmine did not blink. "That line of characters is a seal," she said. "Change a single letter in this memo, and that seal breaks." She pointed to the signature block. "Think of it like a tamper sticker on a medicine bottle. If someone opens it, you know. This is the same idea, but digital." The operator zoomed in so the room could see the fingerprint string. "It ties the memo to your campaign server in the moment it was sent. If this page were cooked up later, the seal would not match." She paused. "Today it matches." Trump scoffed, but it came out thin. "You're playing tech games. I talk to crowds, I don't babysit servers." He flashed a jagged smile toward the cameras. "The deep state signs anything these days." Jasmine's reply cut clean. "Then tell us which 12 senior staffers are part of your deep state because they received this. Tell us why they should have obeyed an order you say never existed." Heads turned toward the row of aides behind him. Eyes dropped. She read the addressee line aloud, each title landing like a drumbeat: Communications Director, Field Operations, Digital Lead, Legal Counsel, Scheduling. "These are not interns," she said. "These are the people who turn words into action." She gestured at the memo's header again. "A memo is not a poem. It isn't written to impress. It's written to be executed. So let's call this what it is: not a rant, a plan." Jasmine let the memo breathe on the screens, then spoke in plain, unforgiving terms. "This is not a hot mic moment, not an angry riff. This is doctrine. It reduces politics to one rule: calm, loses heat, wins. So turn the knob to hot and keep it there." She tapped the time again. "It tells professionals to manufacture heat, not to stumble into it. That difference is the line between accident and intent. And when intent is written, dated, sealed, and delivered to commanders, it stops being noise and becomes ownership." She set the page down, but didn't break eye contact. "So here is the simple fork in the road, Mr. Trump. Either the memo is real or your own campaign seal and timestamp are fake. Either your senior team acted under an order or 12 people invented the same lie together." She leaned closer, voice barely above a whisper, and far more lethal for it. "If not you, then who had the authority to approve this directive inside your campaign?" The question hung in the air like a live wire daring him to touch. She let the memo's glow fade from the screens, then clicked open a new binder, stamped history. The pivot was clean, but the pressure in the room climbed. "Orders show intent," Jasmine said, "and history shows pattern." She slid 3 tabs forward, each marked by a year. "We are not guessing, we are tracing." The crowd outside roared and fell quiet again, as if the city itself were bracing for impact tonight. Charlottesville, 2017, Jasmine continued. Marchers carried torches shouting hate into the night. After blood spilled, you could have calmed the nation. Instead, you told America there were very fine people on both sides. That line didn't heal it excuse, and days later a car plowed into the crowd, leaving a young woman dead. You didn't drive that car, Mr. Trump, but your words cleared the path. Michigan 2020. Jasmine said coldly. You tweeted, "Liberate Michigan," and warned to save your great Second Amendment. Days later, men with AR-15s stormed the State House. Lawmakers walked through hallways lined with rifles. You didn't hand them the guns, Mr. Trump, your words did. And those words turned a policy debate into an armed siege. In January 6, 2021, she said the chamber stiffening at the date alone. On the ellipse, you told them to fight like hell, and they did. The words fell like stone. Windows shattered, hallways flooded, officers, beaten, the floor of Congress evacuated. She kept her tone even, cutting sharper for its calm. Again, a moment when a cooling line could have saved the day, and again the line ran hot. Trump leaned toward the mic, his jaw set. Those were extremists, not me, he snapped. I never told anyone to break the law. I speak, they decide. You can't pin the wild on my back every time some fringe idiot acts out. His glare swept the room, daring anyone to argue, and the challenge met air as cold as steel. Jasmine did not blink. When the script repeats 4 times, people call that the common denominator, she said. Charlottesville, Michigan, January 6th, and now Charlie Kirk. She tapped the binder softly. Different zip codes, same fuel. Each time the spark is words that frame politics as war neighbors, as enemies, compromise as surrender. She stepped closer, voice low enough to draw the chamber forward. The pattern is not subtle. Heat rises where you speak. Order phrase where you perform strength as rage. You rename fury as patriotism, and men who believe you carry that badge into the street. She didn't raise her tone. She didn't have to. Charlie Kirk didn't need a map. He needed a leader who would turn the temperature down. Trump scoffed, but it rang hollow. You turn every crowd into a crime scene in hindsight, he said. People were angry long before me. He reached for his papers and found no line that could outrun the record. His shoulders tensed, and the lights painted hard edges across his face. Even the cameras seemed to lean in, smelling blood in the water. Jasmine kept it simple. Anger is old. The difference is what a leader does with it. She pointed to the dates. 4 chapters, 1 author. The sentence hit like a hammer on stone and brutal. Charlie Kirk is not an accident dropped from the sky. He is the next page in a book your words keep writing. She let the binder close with a soft thud that sounded louder than a shout. Then she aimed the final line straight at him, each syllable clear as glass. How many more outbreaks of chaos will you wait for before you admit that your words are the common denominator? The chamber went still enough to hear the cameras hum. Outside, the chant rose again, low and relentless, no more blood. Inside, every heartbeat seemed to answer the question, a low drum, behind the ribs that said what no mouth dared to say, enough again and again for America. The chamber still trembled with the weight of history when Jasmine reached for one final folder. She did not rush. She slid it forward, opened it with care, and unfolded a single sheet of paper. Her eyes scanned the room, then settled back on Trump. We have seen the videos, the data, the memos, the patterns, she said softly. But tonight I bring something no chart, no precedent, no statistic can erase. Her voice dipped lower. The words of a mother. She lifted the paper so the microphones caught every syllable. The gallery leaned in, cameras zoomed tight. Jasmine read, "My son believed in the words he heard from the stage. He trusted them. He carried them like a shield. But when the bullet came, those words did not protect him. My son is gone, and I am left with nothing but the echo of promises that failed to keep him alive." The words struck the chamber like a tolling bell. Silence fell heavy and suffocating. Senators bowed their heads. In the gallery, a woman dabbed her eyes, a man clenched his fists, reporters froze mid-sentence. It no longer felt like a hearing, it felt like a funeral. The fluorescent lights above hummed like mourners' whispers. The marble floor seemed colder, the air itself grieving. Jasmine folded the paper, but her hands did not shake. She placed it on the table as if laying a flower on a grave. Trump's face twisted. He leaned toward the microphone, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're exploiting tears," he sneered. "You're parading a mother's grief to score political points." "That's disgusting," he smirked, scanning the chamber as if daring someone to disagree. The cruelty in his words broke the silence, but it did not shatter Jasmine. It only sharpened her. She rose straighter, her voice steady, but edged with fire. "No," she said, each letter ringing like steel. "This is not exploitation. This is warning. Because if you keep treating fire as hope, then tears will never stop flowing. Mothers will bury more sons, fathers will stand over more graves, and this nation will drown in the cost of your rhetoric." Her tone did not waver, and that control cut deeper than any shout. The chamber stirred people, shifting breaths, catching pens, pressing harder into paper. Jasmine let the silence return, then continued with precision. "We have gone through every layer, the clip, the law, the science, the data, the memo, the history. Each one builds on the other. But this is not numbers or precedent. This is the cost. This is the bill that came due in blood. And it is signed not in ink, but in the tears of a mother who will never see her son again." Her voice did not crack. It carried the weight of every syllable, as if the mother herself stood there. Trump shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening. He barked again, louder this time, as if to cover the unease creeping into his own face. "I never wanted this. I never wanted anyone hurt. Stop twisting this on me." His voice rose, but the pitch betrayed him. The louder he grew, the more hollow it sounded, like a man arguing against the evidence of his own reflection. His fists pressed into the table, crumpling his notes, his eyes darting as if looking for an escape that didn't exist. Jasmine's reply was soft, surgical, impossible to evade. "You say you never wanted this. Then why fuel it? Why keep shouting 'fight' as if it were salvation? Why treat rage as loyalty division, as power chaos, as proof of strength? You say you didn't want this outcome, but you built the road brick by brick. And when the mother of Charlie Kirk buries her son, she buries the fruit of that road." Her voice carried across the chamber like a verdict. The gallery shifted, some wiping tears, others whispering prayers. Senators sat rigid, caught between shock and shame. Reporters' pens scratched furiously, trying to capture every line before it slipped into history. The silence afterward was not empty. It was charged, vibrating with grief and fury all at once. Jasmine picked up the folded letter again, holding it like evidence too sacred to drop. She looked straight at Trump, her eyes cold as stone. "So I ask you now," she said, her voice low, but clear enough to pierce every corner of the chamber. "Will you look this mother in the eye and tell her that your words had nothing to do with her son's death? Will you dare say to her face that the slogans you fed him did not play a part in the bullet that tore him down?" The question hung like a blade above the room. Trump's lips parted, but no sound came. His throat moved, his hands clenched, but silence choked him. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of his expression. Anger, fear, guilt, denial, all colliding in his eyes. The nation watched, waiting for an answer he could not give. The silence became its own testimony. Jasmine set the letter back on the table, her hands steady. The chamber did not exhale. No one dared to move. And outside, the chants rose again, mournful but furious, echoing through the stone walls. No more blood. No more blood. Inside, the question still rang louder than the chants, louder than the silence. "Will you deny this, mother?" By morning, the mother's letter had slipped out of the chamber and into every living room, and the country woke up with its throat tight. News apps flashed the same push alert within minutes of each other, a drumbeat of identical words. Crockett cornered Trump with receipts. Breakfast televisions looped the 2-minute clip, the legal citations, the memo with its cold signature, and then froze on the line from the letter like a memorial plaque. Anchors kept their voices low, as if still inside the hearing room, while producers stacked split screens to replay the question that never got an answer. Even the opening theme music of the shows sounded smaller, as though the tone had burned off overnight and only the facts remained. By noon, every cable chyron carried a variation of the headline, bright bands running like sirens across the bottom of the screen. Cornered sat beside receipts, the two words clinging to each other like metal and magnet, promising evidence, not opinion. Clips of Jasmine saying you held the microphone replayed so often that the sentence began to land like a gavel in the homes of people who never watch hearings. Pundits who usually argue kept their voices flat, trading analysis for simple timestamps, 7:14, 7:16, because the minutes said more than they ever could. When they did speak, they used the language of impact, not spin. She tied words to consequence. She closed the loop. She made absence of an answer its own answer. The split in the country arrived like a fault line visible from space. In union halls, barber shops, and small-town diners, supporters of Jasmine called her the political thermostat, saying she had finally reached for the dial everyone else was afraid to touch. She didn't shout. She cooled and cut a factory foreman, told a local reporter, tapping the screen as if her control itself were proof. The phrase stuck because people could feel it. She measured the heat, named it, and showed what it burned. Neighborhood moms repeated the line to their teenagers the way parents repeat seatbelt rules. We don't play with fire just because it draws a crowd. The praise never sounded like worship. It sounded like relief. Across another grid of streets, a different chorus rose. Commentators in far-right studios called her the scalpel, meaning it as an insult too precise, too cold, slicing into a movement they insist is flesh and blood. One host waved printouts and sneered, "A scalpel is still a weapon," trying to flip the narrative back onto her. Memes mocked her as a surgeon cutting out patriotism, as if discipline were disease and fury were health. The volume went up, the tempo quickened, the frames flashed red. But the more they talked, the clearer their fear looked. Precision leaves fewer places to hide. Viewers noticed that the anger reached for adjectives while Jasmine had reached for receipts. By afternoon, scholars stepped into the light with language that made the story heavier. This is not merely political speech. This is a command climate, a communications professor said on a national broadcast. Another expert in collective behavior traced the copy effect arc and called it predictable, preventable, and leader-dependent, choosing words that belong to risk assessments, not campaign rallies. A legal scholar returned to the same phrase again and again, imminent, lawless action, as if pointing at the door everyone keeps pretending is a wall. They said it plainly. This has crossed from politics into national security. The shift in vocabulary felt like the room temperature dropping 5 degrees. Veterans added weight no studio could manufacture. A Marine with 2 tours sat in a VFW hall and told a local station, "We know what orders sound like when they're dressed up as pep talks." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Another veteran, a medic from Fallujah, stared straight into the camera and said, "We were trained that command climate predicts casualty rate. You make a culture of fight without discipline, and the body count follows." Their words turned abstract arguments into field reports, the kind of testimony that lives closer to bone than to books. Viewers who ignore professors do not ignore the men and women who zip body bags. Even newsrooms that usually chase horse race graphics pivoted to explainer segments built like safety briefings. They mapped the timeline not for drama, but for clarity, message, spoken message. Repeated violence follows. They replayed the memo's line, "Calm is defeat, escalate the fight," and asked viewers to replace campaign with cockpit or control room to feel how naked the risk sounds in other domains. A former airline safety officer put it bluntly, "If I wrote 'ignore turbulence' into a flight manual and a plane broke apart, would we argue about intent?" The analogy stuck because it was simple and because people who fly understand that words in manuals are signals, not opinions. Classrooms felt the tremor too. Civics teachers abandoned lesson plans and rolled their carts to projectors, pausing the clip at 7:14 and asking their students to define cause, effect, and foreseeable. A high school senior raised his hand and said, "Words are signals, not sound," and the room went quiet because the sentence felt like it should be printed on a poster and taped above the board. In debate clubs, coaches spoke gently to kids who love rhetoric. Powerful language is a tool. A tool can build or a tool can maim. The guidance sounded old-fashioned and brand new at once, like common sense rediscovered after a long fog. Church basements and community centers filled that evening with people who do not appear on panels. A pastor told his flock, "The tongue is a rudder. It turns the whole ship," and no one needed the scripture citation to understand. In a synagogue across town, a rabbi held up a sheet of paper with 3 phrases, "enemy, fight, traitor," and asked the room to write what each word makes their bodies do. Hands shook as pens reached for verbs like tense flare grab, and the exercise turned the broadcast into muscle memory. It was not about censorship. It was about steering, about refusing to pretend the wheel is decoration. In a cramped newsroom in the Midwest, an assignment editor sent her youngest reporter to a candlelight vigil and said, "Find me the sentence they keep repeating." He came back with a scribble from an elderly veteran who had stood at the edge of the crowd, hands in his pockets, eyes on the flames. Leadership is not volume. Leadership is temperature. The editor ran it as a pull quote, and the lines started showing up on courthouse steps and taped to school doors. People recognized themselves in it, exhausted, wary, but not helpless. And that recognition carried the story past politics into the stubborn territory of practice. Late-night hosts, usually armed with monologues, decided to keep the jokes short and the clips long. One said, "Tonight brevity is respect," and simply played the 2 minutes without commentary. Another held a stack of cards and never looked down, whispering, "There's nothing clever to add to a timeline." Viewers stayed through the silence, an audience trained to fill air with laughter, discovering that grief can hold a room better than applause. When the music finally rolled, it sounded like a recessional. By midnight, the headlines still hadn't budged. Crockett cornered Trump with receipts. It ran above front-page photos of candles and faces, and a folded letter on a table, evidence laid out like a country's open file. The divide remained, but beneath the noise, something quieter began to settle, a lesson strong enough to survive the spin cycle. Words are signals, not sound. Say it again, and the meaning deepens. Say it to your kids, your coworkers, your team, your congregation. Say it because the cost of forgetting looks like a timestamp and a fall, and the nation has seen enough of both for a lifetime. The mother's letter still echoed when the next move came, quiet and deliberate. By noon, a small lectern appeared in a side hall beneath the chamber. Reporters drifted in, wary and tired, expecting spin and getting something else. Jasmine stood beside a gray-templed conservative, known for voting conscience over heat. Between them lay a single sheet titled in block letters, 90-Day De-Escalation Pledge. The congressman spoke first, voice worn but clear under the lights. For 90 days, he read no enemy labels, no calls to fight, no metaphors that turned neighbors into targets. He looked up to let each promise settle like sandbags on a flood wall. No fundraising blasts that stoke fear, no stagecraft that frames politics as siege. He lowered the page and nodded to Jasmine. Jasmine took the mic and kept her cadence calm enough to hear shoes shift. "This is not about silence," she said. "It is about control, steering the ship through rough water rather than punching holes in the hull." She set the pledge flat between her palms. "No one is gagging," she said. "We are just turning the heat dial to stop more fires." The clip hit upstairs before the ink dried, and Trump lunged for cameras. "Surrender," he barked, stabbing a finger at the lens. "Gag the movement. They want to shut you up and muzzle your love of country." He spread his arms as if sheltering an unseen crowd. "They want chains for the people and crowns for the elites." Jasmine heard the outburst in her earpiece and didn't change her volume. "Courage doesn't fear discipline," she said, eyes steady. "A leader's job is not to pour gasoline while calling it hope." She tapped the paper once with a forefinger. "This isn't retreat," she said. "This is a safety switch." Producers pressed closer, hungry for proof the new tone wasn't theater. A phone vibrated. An editor hissed, "Independent verification just landed." Screens flared awake with a neutral seal from a digital forensics lab. The subject line said simply, "Memorandum, cryptographic assessment, complete." The room pulled in its breath like a single body. Bullets on the report ticked down in unemotional type. Hash values matched the campaign's server archive exactly. The timestamp aligned with server logs to the second without drift. A signature tied the file to a private key registered to the campaign's domain. Any change after sending would have broken the seal. The seal held. Reporters didn't cheer. They exhaled as if stepping out of smoke. Lower thirds rolled with 4 plain words: signature verified, timestamp verified, no adjectives, no thunder. The restraint made the findings land heavier. For once, nobody was selling anything. The facts stood upright. Then came the human corroboration numbers, can't supply alone. 3 witnesses appeared by remote feed with counsel at their elbows. A deputy communications director, A field operations manager and an outside digital consultant swore oaths. They didn't sermonize, they described meetings, calls, and directives. Each used the same phrase they said they were given: escalate the fight. The deputy recalled a senior meeting where heat was framed as strategy. Slides showed engagement rising when speeches used enemy and fight repeatedly. The field manager described regional calls treating escalation as a standing order. The consultant said he warned algorithms reward conflict-laden language. He memorialized the risk by email and received the reply understood amplify anyway. Trump reappeared upstairs, color-high voice boiling at the edges. Liars and traitors, he shouted. Nerd labs and nobodies. This is forged. This is fake. He offered no alternate logs, no expert, no technical counter. He waved empty papers as if a gesture could dissolve a checksum. The gesture dissolved nothing. Jasmine didn't answer him. She answered the ledger the country was keeping. Today the chain is complete, she said, laying out the links like evidence tags. Words on a stage, echo in a follower's mouth, blood on a floor. Law says imminence matters. Science says heat increases harm. A memo orders escalation. A lab verifies it. Witnesses confirm its use. The congressman signed the pledge, first pen scratching loud in the hush. We can argue policy 90 days without calling each other enemies, he said. We can ask for votes without asking for a war. He set the pen down like a gavel. If your strategy needs rage to stand up, it's a fire hazard. Jasmine signed next her name small, and even on the thick paper. Staffers carried copies to a simple website that would list signers by district. No slogans, no donation buttons, just dates and names. A clock at the top marked days without an incendiary incident. It ticked forward quietly as if refusing to tempt fate. County chairs from both parties watched from folding chairs along the wall. A retired police chief rose awkwardly and asked to speak. 30 years on a radio taught me this, he said. When the channel turns to shouting, you've already lost the scene. He pointed at the pledge. This is radio discipline. Talk radio lines lit in swing counties known for hot tempers. Callers sounded careful as if testing new ice. A farmer said, I'm done being told to fight my neighbor. A bus driver said, I can't teach kids to use words at 8 and cheer violence at 8:30. A retired sergeant said a ceasefire in the mouth is still a ceasefire. Editorial boards sharpened after months of hedging. One wrote, if leadership is temperature, this pledge is a thermostat set to human. Another wrote, forensics matter because they close the back door of doubt. A third printed the memo's line, calm is defeat, and answered it, calm is government. Ink looked newly serious on the page. On the Hill, a handful of conservatives stepped to microphones at last. I'm still a conservative, one said, but I'm not a pyromaniac. Another added, if your plan requires constant adrenaline, you don't have a plan. They endorsed the pledge without fireworks and left before applause could find them. The quiet itself read like leadership. Pollsters avoided horse race numbers and described direction. Older men who usually bristled at restraint began telling interviewers, time to cool it. In distant suburbs, the phrase tired of chaos repeated like a metronome. The change felt more tide than wave grain pulling grain. Campaigns sensed tides first in their ankles, not their charts. Veterans' halls and church basements picked up the language by evening. A Marine told a local station, we know pep talks that dress like orders. A medic said command climate predicts casualty rate words are part of kit. Pastors preached the tongue is a rudder. It turns the ship. None of it was fancy, and that was the point. Trump's allies staged a counter-event under a banner that read, never back down. Speakers shouted until the microphones squealed, and the clips felt like reruns. When asked about the signature, they answered with grievance, not experts. A reporter pressed, will you produce a forensic witness? The spokesman replied, we don't play by their rules. Back at the side hall, the signing table gathered a half-moon of pens. Staff updated the public list as names trickled in from towns, nobody headlines. City councilors, sheriffs, school board chairs, and state reps added signatures. Each looked small alone and necessary together. Stitch is not a sweep, fabric not fireworks. A final note from the lab arrived at dusk, spare as a stamp. End-to-end verification sustained under peer review, it read. No adjectives, no victory lap. 3 witnesses, 1 lab, 1 memo, and a pledge. The chain was no longer a story, it was an exhibit. Logic no longer floated as rhetoric. It settled like steel. Each link supported the next clip timeline, law, science, memo, signature, witnesses, pledge. To reject one required rejecting them all, and the structure stood. The alternative theory demanded a conspiracy of labs logs and people who risked jobs to lie in unison. Viewers chose the simpler story evidence was real, and the fire had a source. Moderate conservatives began saying the quiet part out loud. We can be tough without being toxic, a Chamber of Commerce chair told a breakfast crowd. A sheriff recorded a PSA, honor your rights, lower your voice. A longtime county treasurer wrote rage doesn't balance books and mailed the pledge to every candidate. The movement hadn't flipped, but the center had planted its feet. By nightfall, the audience had shifted in a way polls would chase later. People who once roared at every fight began changing the channel. Donors who prized stability phoned offices quietly to bless the pledge. Local party chairs told candidates, sign it or stop calling. Moderates called it grown-up, zealots called it treason. Jasmine faced one last round of questions at the lectern and didn't blink. This isn't about muzzles, she said. It's about turning the heat down so we don't burn the house we live in. She looked directly into the center camera. 90 days is a start, not a finish. The room held still, hearing something that finally sounded like adulthood. As the verification hardened into fact, the country exhaled, and then it split into two pictures. One was soft enough to hold in your hands. The other was loud enough to rattle glass. You could feel the seam between them like a paper cut, thin, sharp, impossible to ignore. Producers called it a split screen, but it felt more like a battle line. The night itself seemed to choose sides. On the left side of the screen, candles bloomed like quiet stars along courthouse steps and town squares. People stood shoulder to shoulder in sweaters and jackets, hands tucked around wax cups to keep the wind from stealing the flame. A choir began without a conductor, just one voice fighting another, and then another until the melody lifted. God Bless America moved across the crowd like a warm tide, steady and clean. The song didn't shout, it held. An older man in a veteran's cap kept time with two fingers against his heart, mouthing the words as if they were prayer. A woman in a nurse's badge hummed with eyes closed, and a boy who couldn't be more than 9 swayed beside her, careful not to drip wax on his shoes. No one asked who they voted for. No one cared who stood where in the last election. Tonight they shared the same lyric sheet in the same quiet. The quiet was the point. The cameras cut right and the sound punched back like a door blown open. Floodlights blasted a parking lot into noon, and a sea of hats bobbed like buoys in a gale. A vendor pushed through with shirts that screamed "Fight" in letters big enough to be read from the highway. The bass from the speakers thumped against rib cages until even calm hearts beat faster. The chant started in one corner and spread like fire. Fight, fight, fight. A warm-up speaker banged the podium and riled the crowd like a ring announcer before a title bout. He drew enemies in the air with his hands pointed beyond the cameras and told the faithful to steel themselves for the storm. Every sentence rose on a hook word, fight, battle, crush, and the hook set deep. People pumped fists, faces flushed, neck veins standing out like cords. The noise turned into a weather system of its own. Back in control rooms, director fingers hovered over buttons, switching between two Americas. Candlelight and hymn on one cut, floodlight and chant on the next. The whiplash wasn't a trick, it was truth. Two songs were playing in the same country, and each insisted it was the national anthem. The board op whispered, hold on the vigil, and then the rally surged and swallowed the speakers again. Trump arrived on the screen from a third location, not a field, but a studio that looked like a vault for applause. The talk show host leaned in, eyebrows knit just enough to show concern, and handed him lines soft as pillows. Trump took them and sharpened the edges. It's a setup, he said. They're trying to silence you. He didn't wait for the next question. Witch hunt, he added as if reading the caption beneath his own face. They hate your voice. They want to shut you up. He spoke into the camera like it was a mirror, and the crowd at home was standing right behind him. The host nodded, lips pressed, trying to look like he was hearing evidence and not slogans. He tried to pivot to policy, but Trump pulled it back to grievance with a strong man's tug. They call it de-escalation, he scoffed. I call it surrender. The host floated. What about discipline, and got a snort for his trouble? Nobody ever won anything by cooling off. He smiled like a boxer who had outlasted the bell. While the studio pumped oxygen into outrage, the clip of Jasmine's cross-examination caught a wind of its own. It was not a montage. It was a clean slice. 7:14 the line, 7:16 the shot, the memo, the seal, the quiet question that caved in the room. The edit needed no music because the timestamps had their own drum. You held the microphone landed again and again, more cruelly each time, because it was said without heat. The clip was not content, it was proof. Phones lit up like a runway as it leapt from feed to feed without losing a pixel. People who hate politics watched it to the end because the end was silence, and silence is hard to fake. The talk show lost sound to living rooms replaying 2 minutes with their fingers on pause and rewind. A grandmother texted it to a grandson who had never voted. A foreman posted it on a break room corkboard between safety notices. The country did not argue with it so much as absorb it. Producers in the studio got numbers in their ears and started tapping note cards against their palms. A segment was cut. Another segment died before its chair rolled in. The host tried to steer the conversation toward moving forward, but the control room chose to throw a break on a close-up that made the makeup look like armor. The camera does not pity, it records. Tonight it recorded erosion. At the vigil, the second verse turned to humming, and the humming turned to silence on cue. Someone lifted a folded flag high, and the front row made space as if the gesture needed room to breathe. A pastor near the steps set down his candle and knelt on the stone, not to pray, but to rest his hand on the ground as if to cool the city under it. People followed, knees creaking backs, stiff a choir of joints acknowledging the cost of standing. They rose together, slow and deliberate. A little girl asked her mother why the song made her cry, and the mother wiped her cheek and said, "Because it sounds like home and hurts like news." A veteran stepped forward to speak and change his mind, lowering the mic and shaking his head because the words he had were the wrong size. Someone started the chorus again, and the crowd caught it by reflex. The candles swayed without rhythm, and that was more honest than a march. Not every step in a rescue is measured. Security at the rally moved through the aisles like a current against the tide. A scuffle flared and folded, leaving a torn sign and a bruise that would bloom in the morning. On the big screen behind the stage, the graphic fight pulsed in time with the subwoofers. A showrunner's hand hovered over the cut switch when someone in the crowd lifted a phone, and the blue light on the screen showed Jasmine's face instead. For a heartbeat, the room heard her say, "That's not chance. That's consequence." The speaker on stage laughed it off and brought the volume higher to drown the ghost in the glass. "We don't back down," he shouted. "We never cool off." He offered the crowd a promise dressed as a threat, and they cheered because cheering felt like purpose. The word fight landed like a chorus without music. It filled the air the way smoke does, completely and without asking permission. News anchors tried to ride the wave and not get dragged under it. They pulled up the pledge on one panel and the rally feed on another and asked, "Which future do you want to live in?" The question was not rhetoric, it was a traffic sign. The vigil sound would slip under the rally's shock, and then the rally's shock would slam back, and the mix engineer had to decide which one owned the frequency tonight. Even the ads looked nervous. In a small studio with a plain backdrop, Jasmine stepped to a lectern with no logo and no flag banked behind her. There was only a microphone and a page of notes she didn't look at. She stared straight down the lens as if daring it to blink. "You have seen enough," she said. "You know the difference between heat and leadership." She did not clear her throat. She did not thank anyone for their time. She simply laid out the last line in a voice that carried like clean water poured into a dry glass. Every leader leaves a legacy, either a thermostat that cools the fire or a blaze that burns everything down. She stopped, and the silence after the sentence felt like a held breath. Charlie Kirk is the proof that fire kills the very people who believe in it. She waited for the echo to fall back into the room so the weight of it would not spill. "It is time for America to choose a different path." The words were not a flourish, they were a door. She stepped back from the microphone and left the door open. The vigil heard the line on car radios and the singing softened, then settled into quiet you could feel in the bones. People did not clap. They bowed their heads and let the candles speak. A teenage boy lowered his phone and slipped it into his pocket as if he had been carrying something fragile and could finally put it down. The flag in the front row seemed to breathe. The flames shivered and held. At the rally, the chant lost a half beat as phones flashed the same three sentences across the crowd. Some faces tightened, some went blank, some roared louder to drown out the words in their heads. The stage manager told the band to crank the outro, and the guitars did what guitars do, cover a retreat with noise. The cameras found the strongest faces and framed them tight. The director called it a night before the night called him. In homes where the two pictures lived on opposite channels, parents reached for remotes and chose the one with fewer decibels. Dogs lifted their heads when the music stopped and then put them down again, satisfied with the quiet. A grandfather opened his front door and listened to a silence that belonged to him for the first time in months. The street was empty and kind. Somewhere far away, a siren did not start. The edit suites stitched the day into a broadcast that didn't need narration. Candles chant, talk show clip pledge, verification vigil rally, and the final sentences laid down like tracks one after another. The country did not solve itself. It did not heal in a montage. But the picture sharpened enough for decision. The choice no longer looked like a party. It looked like a temperature. Jasmine did not return to the microphone. She had said all that could be said without breaking the things she was trying to save. The night took the words and set them next to the candles, and dared the wind to snuff either. The wind tried and failed. The flames held and the chant died out where the floodlights cooled. Her final words still hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear. The lights softened, the microphone stayed live, and the room waited for something that would not come a rebuttal strong enough to undo the day. Instead, the truth settled simple and sharp. Words have a price. They are invoices written in sound, and the ledger never forgets. Pay attention or pay later. When leaders spend language like confetti, someone else cleans the streets. When they trade in insults and call it patriotism, the bill arrives at night in a hospital corridor. If there is no discipline, that price is blood. Discipline is not censorship. It is a seatbelt on a speeding country. It tightens when the curve sharpens, and it saves the people in the back who never touch the wheel. You cannot swap it for adrenaline and expect the crash to spare you. Leadership responsibility cannot be avoided. You can dodge microphones, but not consequences, reroute cameras, but not history. The chain has been shown link by link, and it holds. A leader can cool a room or set it on fire. The difference is choice, not fate. If heat is your only instrument, you are not conducting, you are burning. Own the damage or change the song. Call it a bill, a reckoning, a receipt. Language does not change the math. Every reckless phrase accrues interest, and someone pays it with fear in a crowd or sirens at 2 a.m. Discipline is the line you draw before events draw it for you in chalk. Responsibility is the hand that reaches for the dial when the room overheats. It does not excuse, it repairs. It does not posture, it protects. In the end, leadership is not about how loud you can speak, but how safely others can live after you speak. This is the message stripped of spin. Words have a price. If there is no discipline, that price is blood. Leadership responsibility cannot be avoided. The country can learn it the hard way in pain or the steady way in practice. Tonight it has been written plainly enough to read from a distance. The director cut to a wide shot, and the hall fell away into the night. Candles trembled in rows along the steps, faces lifted toward the cool sky, breath pooling like mist above the crowd. The zoom pulled back farther until city lights formed constellations around the vigil's small fires, holding their ground. A gust tried to smother the nearest flame, and a dozen hands moved at once to shield it. The microphones caught the first voices, then more, until the sound turned into a single steady tide. Choose differently, no more blood. Thank you for watching until this moment, and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.